Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 96. I've got a really interesting author and book to introduce you to tonight. Emily Weedon is a Toronto-based novelist and screenwriter with a thrilling debut novel called Autokrator, and it's about autocracy. And we've heard a lot about autocracy of late, and so I think that this novel is kind of interesting. Emily Weedon is a screenwriter. She's a novelist. She's a filmmaker. She's a recovering musician who is comfortable writing across many mediums and genres. She is the author of this, as I mentioned, debut novel, Autokrator, with Cormont Books, and a co-creator of 2 seasons of Chateau Laurier, as well as a screenwriter on the adult animation series for Sphere Media, Red Ketchup. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Brian, thank you so much for having me. This is a thrill.
This is a thrill for me. So, Autokrator, what does the title mean?
I took it from it's a Greek word, and it actually turns out to be the base word for Caesar and Tsar. It means emperor. It's a lone ruler, and it sort of sounds like a bit of a bossy ruler, I guess you would say. And I think we're no stranger to seeing bossy rulers these days in politics right around the globe.
Why did you decide to write about autocrator and bossy
Well,
rulers?
it developed in the writing. Initially, I was actually writing just about a woman and her travails, living in a dark place. It was mirroring a bit of my own life. But as I wrote, I was living in a time, as we all are, where politics is kind of blowing up all around us. So a lot of what was going on in the world seeped into my consciousness and the book.
You were writing about a woman in a dark place. Tell me about that.
That's right. At the time that I started this, I was already doing screenwriting of all sorts, but I had decamped to Hungary with my ex, who's the father of my kid. So the three of us were in Hungary for about a year. I made a valiant effort to learn Hungarian. I can still speak a few words, but essentially I was isolated, a trailing spouse living in Hungary alone with a 2-year-old. They aren't very good at conversation, as I think a few people know. And I was going a little crazy and getting a little depressed. And I'm a busy person. So I found myself writing things down and thinking about the place that I was in. And one of the questions that came up to me was, if this is what a woman's life is like, could it be worse? And the book is very much an answer to that question.
And what is the answer? Could it be worse, or is a
Uh,
woman's life trailing an ex to Hungary and not knowing the language the worst it can get?
It certainly is not the worst it could get. And I was kind of, I surprised myself at times about how the book gets into some pretty dark territory. And some of that is because, I work with drama. I live in the world of creating drama. And so I wanted to make a book that was a ripping good read. So I drag my main characters through all sorts of trouble.
Is the main character female?
Yes, I have 2 main characters, really. They're sort of co-protagonists, if you will, Sarah and Tiresias. And both women get into all sorts of difficulties. One is looking for love, essentially, through her child, and one is only interested in power.
And which one succeeds?
Uh, in their own ways, they both succeed. But because it's a cautionary tale, they also both have major difficulties. It's an ending that leaves questions, basically. I'm very worried about power and its use and abuse, as I think all people in a democratic society should be. Power corrupts. We know this. We learn this very early on. And a big chunk of the novel does take on the idea that, once you grab power, it's a slippery eel, and it can turn around and bite you. It can ruin you.
Autocracy is something that we're faced worldwide with, and maybe even in our neighbor to the south. And with what you wrote me, one of the big concerns you had was autocracy's impact on women's health and
Yeah.
rights in the U.S. and around the world. Tell me why that's such a concern to you.
Yeah, I don't think there's a direct correlation necessarily between autocracy itself, because of course women can become supreme leaders as well. But there is a concomitant, or at the same time, a parallel decline in women's rights around the world. We've seen this in countries. We're looking at what's happening in Afghanistan. We're looking at what's happening in the United States, and we're seeing that even though we declared, as of when I was born, we're like, all right, women are totally equal. And I keep going through my life saying, where's this equality really? It hasn't quite worked out that way. Women still bear the burden of domestic labor, most of the burden of raising children while trying to have a career. And that's just on a domestic individual front. Those are big issues that impact how much money one can earn, how much freedom one can have. But the bigger issues, of course, are, what's happening to women's health in the States. They've got laws coming out that are from the late 1800s that they're enacting now. This doesn't feel like an equal democratic world anymore.
A lot of the issue that you're talking about really was caused by the Supreme Court nullifying Roe v. Wade.
That's
But
right.
there's several females on the Supreme Court, and several very conservative females on the Supreme Court.
That's right.
So is that autocracy, or misogyny, or the patriarchy, or is it our justice system? That's
A little from column A, a little column B. I mean, one of the big things I did want to deal with in this book, we don't get to see this very often. As an author, I'm interested in the idea of creating a female character who isn't the good guy necessarily. Lover or hater, Thatcher was a polarizing person when she was in power. What gender you are doesn't necessarily dictate you being a nice or good or liberal person, not that all of those are exactly the same thing. But I wanted to explore a character who was just as capable of being Machiavellian as a man, despite not being one.
so equality means also that women can be bad guys too.
Women can be bad guys too. Yeah. And that's why I do come back to the touchstone. It's not the gender. It's not your politics. It's not who you are. It's how power can corrupt you. I think we should be very nervous when people are jostling to grab power. That doesn't generally work out well for those who don't have the power.
In addition to this issue of autocracy, you say that your book bridges speculative fiction and sci-fi. What the heck is speculative fiction? And tell me how both speculative fiction and sci-fi are in your book.
Well, so I think of it as a kind of a soft sci-fi. I'm not, one of the an Asimov type writer. But speculative basically means that it's a different reality, if you will. I didn't want to write something set in the past. I didn't want to write something set in the future. I'm not saying that we ourselves are traveling towards the reality in my book. I just asked, what if? And to shore up that what if, I had to cut out all sorts of things. That's what an artist does. An artist focuses on specific things. One of those I didn't want to focus on, for example, was if I'm talking about women's rights, I didn't want to be mired up in religion. And that made me think, well, I need a world that doesn't have Christianity or any of the other religions that we know of. I want a clean slate. So that's the speculative part. It's a made up what if you will. The science part is interesting to me because a true science fiction novel is deeply rooted in some kind of science. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a huge science background, but I was looking at issues of, for example, reproduction. And the book asks some questions about what would happen if there was such a thing as a way to have babies without wombs. So I'm writing this, and as I'm writing it, in the news, more and more, there are stories about how we're developing external wombs, exogenesis, they call it. So that now puts me squarely in science fiction because I'm asking, what is the impact of a technology on human behavior?
What would be the impact of being able to have a baby without a womb?
The mind boggles. I mean, we are dealing with really unknown territory. And I think we find ourselves as a species at a point in time where our ability with technology is outstripping our morals, our ethics, and perhaps even our comprehension, you know? I'm quite nervous about the idea of a deeply, pick a deeply totalitarian society that has control of external wombs, that says perhaps all embryos have rights and should be born. Um, who's who's deciding? Who's saying how many of these external wombs there are? What happens to the beings that are in these external wombs? Who's in charge of them? It can go to all sorts of dark places. And I think at the foundation, it also asks a bit of a question. If many people on the planet think of women as only useful because of having a womb, and then we have external wombs, then what happens to women's rights? Then what happens to women? Perhaps it emancipates us in some unforeseen way, but people have a way of messing things up. So as a writer, I think about the dark possibilities.
Your idea of someone declaring every embryo outside of a womb a being seems ludicrous until, what was it, just a month ago?
Yeah.
The Texas Supreme Court said that was the case. Maybe it wasn't Texas. I can't remember now. And maybe in Arkansas, in vitro petri dish conceptions were considered beings, human
That's
beings.
right. That's right. And at a time when, because IVF has been basically exploding, and part of the process is you have to make extra embryos because of the failure rate of X amount of them. If people want to have a child, they have to have extra embryos. So now there's cryogenically frozen embryos all over the place, that it's being suggested that these have rights the same way you or I have rights. So then the next question is, what happens to them, and who says if the original parents have passed on or can't afford to have those kids? It goes into all kinds of crazy dark places. It's a very strange issue.
What's the solution, do you think? Do they have rights? Should they be forced to be born, or can you destroy them? And some people would think murder them.
Right. I think that that's got to be a question that should be asked of the individual parents who are bringing them into the world. And it is a question for society to examine closely. I don't have the exact answer because, I've never been put in the position to have fertilized, to have embryos, that are kept on a shelf somewhere. I would worry what the implications of that are. I honestly don't know. And this is part of my issue with all of it, that we as a species haven't caught up to what we're able to do. Shouldn't we slow things down a little bit and ask ourselves these very questions?
Sounds like your book is really quite intriguing. Now, do you have a favorite character?
I do have a favorite character, Tiresias, this person who is not so good. She's not so much of a good guy, I suppose, but she is a protagonist. She is delicious. She's Machiavellian. She's like Iago. She's scheming and cunning and plotting. And outside of soap operas, perhaps, we don't get to see this kind of character writ large. And I wanted to write a character that had a Shakespearean kind of feel to them, and to give a character like that to a female role, because we so often play second fiddle. I myself actually once played Desdemona in Othello, and I had three lines, and they were all along the lines of "What ho, my lord! Oh no, my lord! Don't kill me, my lord!" Not great character development. There's a real hunger out there for characters who can be multidimensional and seething, and not necessarily the good guy. So I adore Tiresias. She's smart, she's brassy, she's wry, she's got a great sense of humor, and she will stop at nothing.
This book, you say, shows us a big world. What
Yes.
places inspired it?
I was very lucky several years back before my daughter was born to get to see some parts of the world. And again, when we lived in Hungary, and I was really lucky to get to visit Syria before the war happened and saw Palmyra, the ancient site in the middle of Syria with my own eyes. Agatha Christie actually traveled there as well at one point and was stunned by the beautiful ruins. They just go on for kilometers. Places like Hue in Vietnam, and I was thinking about Derinkuyu in Turkey. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm absolutely enchanted by it. Uh, Whenever I visit places like this, my writer's mind goes into overdrive, and I think, who lived here? How did they live here? What did they do? What kind of lives did they have? And so as the book grew and this speculative what if world grew, I started drawing on these places that I'd visited and thought about their structures and how they looked and how they felt and injected that into the novel.
Sounds like you've lived in a big world, and you've traveled to some fascinating places. You've been a writer, you've been in screen, you've been in film, you've been in theater. You're a recovering musician.
That's right.
Sounds like you've lived life big. How come you had this dark place?
Oh, well, they say that artists, especially, a lot of what we do is we reflect back to the world what we see, and there is a lot of darkness in the world, and there's an urge when you make art to, I suppose, beautify or correct or perfect some of the things that are amiss with it. It is at the same time to celebrate it. I mean, I'm celebrating people and places I've seen and met in this book. But I am, I suppose, also making a cautionary tale about where lopsided politics could go, where deciding that one gender is better than another can go. It's a big, it's quite a stew, really, when you get to it. Writing a novel, it's your whole life compressed into there.
Your whole life compressed into there.
Yeah.
I've recently become a Swiftie, and
Congratulations.
Taylor Swift came out with this album, and it has I don't even know what you call it, but a sort of an inscription. And I'll paraphrase, but it effectively is that writing is very therapeutic, and you put it down you put your ink down, and they become your tears, and then you get over it. Was writing very therapeutic for you?
It was. It did. I mean, I was working out of loneliness and depression, and I've got a book out of it. That's kind of incredible. That's a type of manifestation, I suppose. Um, it was also just pure pleasure to do the writing. Not every project I find is simple or easy to write, to get into. People talk about finding your groove when you're in a particular project. Some projects you have to sit down and say, now look, you get over here and do this and do that. This book unfurled to me. I felt like I was watching a movie rather than coming up with things when I was writing it. I plotted my beginning, my middle, my end, but I would show up each day to the page, and it was Tiresias who told me, we're going this way. We're going down this hall. We're going to see what's down this way. And the same with Sarah. And a lot of the process was me saying, okay, show me. And it was beautiful and entertaining and a surprise around every corner.
Are you Tiresias or Sarah?
Oh, a little column A, a little column B. It's so interesting, isn't it? The question often comes up for fiction writers. How much of you is in this book? It's funny because the flip side is when somebody writes a memoir, the first question is, how much of this is made up? And like both genres, there's a lot of made up stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I've drawn on from my life. I suppose the short answer is I probably lean towards Tiresias a bit more.
So you're evil and manipulative and not the good girl.
Drive and ambition and unapologetic ambition and a feeling of always plotting what the next step might be. But more than anything, a sense, I mean, I have a memory from when I was a kid in high school. I was in a science class and I disagreed with my teacher about something. And it was a debate kind of disagreement. It wasn't a big deal, but he didn't like it. And next thing I know, I'm being called down to the principal's office and I get a tongue wagging, "You should learn to be more humble." Now, that's a lesson that I think a lot of women learn early on, sometimes more overt, sometimes more covert. But from that moment on, I remember a sense of stay in your lane, and stay quiet, and stop piping up. And this burning rage that Tiresias has in them is from that same sensation of being pressed down, being oppressed. So I think a lot of the novel came out of that sense of I have something to say, and it burst out.
Have you written that science teacher and told him that he was the catalyst for your desire to tell the world something?
No, but I wished I could reach out to my Latin teacher from that same school. I got 100% in that Latin class, and that teacher was one of those all-time amazing teachers who just inspires students. And I have to say, teachers make such a difference to those of us who are they make a difference to all of us, and any little bit of being encouraged helps. So I'll let the book castigate the science teacher.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Emily Weedon in just 2 minutes. And we're going to talk a little bit more about both her book and about some films that she's been involved with, some screenwriting. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Emily Weedon. She is a screenwriter, she's a novelist, she's a filmmaker, and she's a recovering musician. We got to find out what she's recovering from. And she's comfortable, therefore, writing across many mediums and genres. And she's the author of a debut novel. Oh my God, I can't remember how to pronounce it now.
Autokrator.
Autokrator. That we've been just chatting about. And it sounds like you've got two incredibly interesting characters. Is it Sirius and Sarah?
Sarah and Tiresias.
Tiresias. And you're going to read something from the book about Tiresias for us, if you could.
All right. So this is chapter 46 from the book, and Tiresias is speaking. My next audience was with the Autokrator. He was floating in his enormous copper bath like some kind of pale garden grub. I smirked inwardly. Here was the male form in all its power and glory. Hams for legs, swollen arms, a belly that folded over itself, and tiny genitals that seemed to have gone into retirement. All these appendages looked nearly phosphorescent in the bathwater. So, out with it. His voice ricocheted off the hard surfaces of the room. He was always ill-tempered these days, constantly turning over real and perceived plots against him in his mind. I have reason to believe the Imperial Toolist is holding on to secret information regarding the consort. What sort of information? He asked with noticeable caginess. I hated the old goat for thinking he was so clever. I believe that the consort is being poisoned. Oh, well. For a moment, Gentius's composure slipped. He struggled to find words, but he quickly settled on outraged deflection. Who would do such a monstrous thing? It is unthinkable, Autokrator. Indeed, we must investigate this at once. He hauled himself out of the tub while water sloughed off his hanging flesh. We must call an emergency parliament. You call the portfolio head, say after supper. The Autokrator was buying himself the rest of the day to obfuscate. Perhaps we too could have an audience with the Imperial Toolist? Impossible. He's busy with Imperial work and must not be disturbed. I will speak to him myself and relay his words back to you. This didn't come as a surprise, but it still rankled that the Autokrator had been triangulating between us like this for years now. Despite dripping disbursements out to the Toolist and offering the odd gift, the gates remained shut to me. A churlish, infantile means of exercising power. Moreover, the Autokrator's solution was unseemly. Running about like an errand boy? If that was the way the Supreme Leader wished to carry himself. At the Parliament, then. Tonight. I backed out of the room with my head down. perturbed that I'd had to witness his rolls of loose, glistening flesh.
That's excellent. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
The Autokrator. Why is there this attraction for so many people, this populism in Hungary, in the United States, in India, maybe, in Russia for sure, to vote for and support autocrats?
I think it's a human need to simplify things. I think people, democracy is a wild and woolly thing. It does require that people be tuned in and aware of issues and the roots of issues. It requires that you be constantly educating yourself about things. Autocracy or totalitarianism is a much more binary, simplistic way of living. Somebody tells you what to do and you do it. I think there's a part of all of us, a childish part perhaps, that longs for that sense of a big mummy or daddy to say, right, time for bed, eat your greens, etc. But of course, we know what happens with it. It consolidates power dangerously in hands. And we do, as humans, grow up from parents. Democracy is growing up from totalitarianism, I believe.
Democracy is growing up from totalitarianism.
It's the more evolved step. So we see ourselves around the world devolving, becoming more infantile, perhaps, needing to be told what to do by a paternalistic leader.
You had to follow someone to another country, and you didn't have the language, and I guess you were just a new mother. Were you living in a totalitarian environment? And that
Yeah, it was on a couple of different levels. And it's a strange experience too. I mean, it's a very humbling experience in a lot of ways. I've always lived in my brain. Becoming pregnant and having a child makes you so much more aware of your body and kind of traps you in your body, traps you in the physical. I mean, when you're trying to breastfeed a kid, you are aware that you're a mammal, and I suppose that again is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, as a bit of a rebellion. If I had to stay home and be a mammal, at least my mind could wander free. And interestingly, I often think a lot of people, when they go to prison, what do? They write a book. Well, I was in a kind of a prison in this small place in a country where I was an outsider and didn't have a family. So I was lucky, though. I did meet a really interesting group of people. They called themselves the Group, a bunch of expats from all over who were writers. So shout out to the Budapest Writers Group, who were they were good friends when I was living there.
in addition to writing a novel, you've been a screenwriter, and I understand Ketchup and Red Ketchup and Chateau. Tell me about your screenwriting.
Yeah, Chateau, I co-created and co-developed, co-wrote, etc. with Kent Staines and James Stewart. We made 2 seasons of it. It's about the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, and it's sort of a Canadian Downton Abbey, if you will. We wanted to talk about upstairs, downstairs, and the main character, Hattie, at the center of it, much like the characters in my book, is a bit of a rebel and goes sneaking around the chateau and gets herself into some scrapes. It's a much more lighthearted thing than Autokrator is, but a period piece. And we had some incredible success with it. We had people from Southeast Asia, for some reason, really took it up, and we had millions of clicks from people when we first released it. And then it went on last year. It astonished all of us who were involved in making it, to get it was the most awarded web series in the world for 2023.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Incredible. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
what about Red Ketchup?
Red Ketchup is such an interesting project. It's an adult animation. It's made by Sphere Media, and it's playing on it's Teletoon La Nuit, or the River TV. It's and Global runs it sometimes. It's based on a French Canadian project called Red Ketchup, made by a Quebec artist. It's been around since the 80s, and Martin Villeneuve brought it into development along with Willem Winokur's, and they turned the comic into a TV show, which was an incredible experience. It often takes years in Canada to get things to the screen. And it's a crazy main character. Red is an albino FBI agent, and he pops pills, he drinks gasoline, and punches through walls. He's not a very typical Canadian character. And we wrote these stories about him, a comedy about him traveling the world and doing his particular brand of spy work, basically.
What are you writing now?
I am working on a couple of new novels. I have a series. The first one is called Homo sapiens, that sort of suggests that maybe vampires are a different species. And I'm working on another new novel that really takes on media and fame head on. It contrasts two siblings, one who's famous and one who is not and wants to be. So I really want to get into issues of jealousy and envy and how fame can really warp people.
How fame can really work people.
Warp
People.
Yeah.
How does fame warp people?
Well, I think it turns everything into a strange looking glass. People looking at famous people have a warped idea of what they are. And once you become famous, you become kind of a prisoner of that reality. I would never personally want to live in a world where you have to wear dark glasses to go to 7-Eleven to get a big gulp. That's an existence I just don't want to have.
What other authors inspired you to write?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. For this particular book, there are shades of 1984 and Animal Farm from Orwell, for sure. I'm deeply inspired by Mervyn Peake. He has a great trilogy called Gormenghast that's just so atmospheric, and it has a sweep of history that I really love. Anne-Marie MacDonald wrote Good Night, Desdemona, Good Morning, Juliet. I did some work out of that. I did some monologues out of it when I was a student and just fell in love with the text. And MacDonald's work was an early one that made me realize you can write big, huge female characters. And of course, Handmaid's Tale is in there. I was actually asked originally by my publisher before they took on the book, so why does the world need another Handmaid's Tale? And I was actually invited to write a letter in response to that question. And the response was that there's room for so many dystopian female-led stories like this because women do still live their own private dystopias, because we are yet not equal.
So what inspired this book? Was it Oban in Hungary, or was it your ex in Hungary, or was it your lone life in Hungary? What inspired it?
Definitely, it was where my relationship was at, and where I was at in a domestic situation with a child. There was a real light bulb moment, though, when I knew I wanted to deal with women oppressed by domesticity, let's say. And I visited a place called Schönbrunn Palace in Austria, and the tour guide was pointing out how the stoves in each one of the imperial rooms are fed from behind down a hidden passageway. So the servants would work in these hidden passageways, putting coal into these stoves and ferrying dishes back and forth. And that was that classic French coup de foudre, right? That was my lightning moment. That was my inciting moment as a writer. Oh my God, the women don't even live with the men. They're behind the walls. They're under the floors. And that's where this whole idea of above and below in the book came from. The women live below. So thank you, Schönbrunn Palace, for that inspiration.
what does your ex think about being the inspiration for a book about autocracy?
I don't know. We haven't actually chatted about it. My daughter loves it though. My daughter is right into the book, and I think I have a burgeoning feminist on my hands.
Has he read it?
I don't know that he has.
You haven't
He's a
mailed
busy
one to
guy.
him.
Sorry, say again.
You haven't mailed one to him.
I think he's got a copy in the house somewhere, but he's a busy guy. He works in film and he's producing, and it's a 9 to 9 life.
You created a movie trailer for your book.
I
That's
did.
interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, book talk. People have been talking about book talk a lot these days, and as I was finishing up the final drafts of the book and looking ahead to trying to get it out into the world, it's never been harder for authors and novelists to get their work out, even though there are more and more books being printed every day. The media has shrunk, outlets have shrunk. We're all looking at our devices all of the time. Capturing people's attention and imagination it's a full-time job. And of course, because I'm a filmmaker and I come from film as my background, when I heard that people are doing trailers for book talk, I thought, all right, I'm going to try this out. So I made a 1 minute trailer for the book to try to capture some of the energy and vibe of it, to give readers a sense of what they could be into.
Where can people see the trailer and where can they buy the book?
The book is out everywhere. You can get it at Indigo. You can get it at your local bookseller. If you go to my website, there's a button right there that sends you to buy local. You plug in your postal code and it will tell you where you can go. It's also on Amazon. The trailer can be seen on my website as well, emilyweedon.com.
The book is about, you say, power and politics and rights.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope the reader gets out of this? Is there a message that comes out of it?
Yes, it's that power is seductive and corrupt. But I do also, at the end of the day, I really just wanted to make a book that takes people away, that gives people a great ride, that gives them catharsis, drama, a sweeping scope. For me, my favorite books have a bit of a message to them, but that's not the only reason I read them. I wanted to make something that's immersive, and I tried to make an immersive page-turning world for my readers.
When you take a look at Oban in Hungary or Putin or, religious theocracies in Iran, some people would say Netanyahu is close to that, at least certainly right wing, ultra right wing in Israel. The rise in support for Donald Trump in the United States, the death of Roe v. Wade, what we just talked about in regards to IVF treatment in the United States, the movement against abortion rights, etc., worldwide, and the rise of autocracy worldwide. And, I think certainly numerous comments about misogyny and patriarchy, etc. Are you optimistic about the future? Or are you pessimistic and almost dystopian about the future?
I am optimistic. We are in a time, there's no question. And it's interesting, as I've gotten older, I've gotten, you become more aware of political winds and changes, but you become aware as well that there is a shape, we're at a pendulum swing moment, I think. I think our pendulum is starting to get buried at one extreme. And the interesting thing I think about totalitarianism and extreme political situations is that they tend to be somewhat short-lived. They blow themselves out, they can rot from within. And it might not be in my lifetime, but people crave freedom. That's part of what the book is about as well. It's people fumbling and stumbling towards their freedom. So I do believe in the end that freedom will be more seductive than power.
Remind us the name of the book.
The book is Autokrator.
And where can one get it?
One can get it in bookstores right across Canada.
Emily Weedon, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about your book and, you know, a little bit about your cautions in regards to autocracy and totalitarianism and the patriarchy, I guess. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Brian, thank you. This has been a really great conversation. I enjoyed it.
It's my pleasure. We're going to take a break, and I'm going to come back with some of my own comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Thank you very much, Emily.
Bye.